Welcome back once again to So You Want to Be a Writer. I believe, Ros, we're looking at inspiration for writing this week?
Indeed. In fact, two very readily available sources of inspiration. We're going to talk about using photos and using music to help generate ideas for your book, whatever you're writing, whether it's fiction or non-fiction.
So, when you say photos, I mean just photos or postcards, pictures, paintings, posters, anything? Or?
Well, yes. Really, what I want to talk about is using sites like Flickr and YouTube to sort of stumble across things that will help you create your book. If it's a novel, it might be the setting, or it might be for a non-fiction book too. But all these sort of ways that you can find material that will help you build the world in your mind.
So, if I were writing a book about something I know nothing about, set in a bell foundry, I could Google bell foundry images and then get an idea of what casting bell metal's like, using a furnace, all that sort of thing.
Yes, that would be a way to start. And then what I would do is I would try and find a location to set the bell foundry in. So I might find the kind of town it might be in. So that would give me the surroundings. And then once I've got a geographical location where it could realistically be in the real world, I would then Google for images of those. And at that point, actually, I think I'd go off the beaten track a bit. I'm a real fan of the photo sharing site Flickr, and there are a lot of people who put photos up on Flickr that they don't mind you looking through, and they tag them so that you can find them. You can just browse people's snaps of places, and these are very real experiences, and they're a way to build up a very real portfolio in your mind of what a place is like. And you don't have to you're not going to publish them or use them, and people have put these photos up with knowing that strangers will look at them, but you can use them to almost build. You can copy them, and they don't mind you doing that. If you're not going to publish them, it's fine, but you can build up a sort of collage or mood board that will give you, say, key locations, or show you, say what your bell foundry might be, what kind of setting it might have, what it might look like from the outside, what might be around it. And when you do that, as soon as you do that, it gives you other ideas too.
This is a research tool that's got some well-proven history behind it. Before the D-Day landings, the British government asked people for holiday snaps.
Oh, yes.
The holidays in northern France
yes.
and places like that, so they'd have extra information and try and see what things were like and identify buildings and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, I can see. So this is using pictures as a research tool, as a way of establishing a mood or a setting.
Yes, it is. It makes it more solid in your own mind, and it gives you something to key into that you can describe on the page if you want. You can begin to imagine the kind of society that belongs to, the kind of people who might live nearby, or if it's in a deserted place, for instance. And before the days of the internet, but long after the days of the D-Day landings, when I was doing research for my ghost-written books, I was having to write about locations I'd never been to. I could sometimes question the person who I was ghosting as if they'd been there, but nothing actually beat going and finding pictures for myself. So what I'd do is I'd look in a lot of travel books to get just a flavour of a place. I'd also get descriptions by reading how these places were brought to life in prose. And another thing I had that was a very valuable possession was the entire National Geographic on DVDs.
Wow.
Yes, it's beautiful. So you can go back.
So pictures, we're not talking about necessarily just stills, but also little clips.
Actually, they weren't clips. No,
They
they
weren't,
were
no?
stills
They
because
were all
they were the
stills.
magazines
Okay.
put onto DVD. But the quality of the photography was stunning, and you could just get lost in them. And they did make them searchable, so I could type in, say, the island of one of the Caribbean islands I was researching, and I could find everything they had published about it, and including the pictures, and that helped me build up the place.
And this is just a free resource, this sort of stuff,
Well,
isn't it?
actually, that wasn't a free resource at the time because, but I bought it.
But Flickr and things like
But
this,
Flickr
it's just...
has taken the place of this, and Flickr is even more individual experiences because people, you know how people now take pictures of everything, and there's a vast resource out there if you know how to search through it, and it's all legal to do this. Again, as I keep saying, if you were reproducing these pictures, that'd be a different matter altogether. But just to use them for your own personal research and inspiration, that's perfectly fine. You're not sort of hurting anybody by looking at their pictures, and they've let you do that anyway.
This is strange. When you first talked about the topic for today's show, I was thinking along the lines of something slightly different. I was thinking you might be using a picture to inspire you because you might see a story between two characters and a bit of machinery or something in a picture. There might be a picture of almost anything, and you could build a story around it. But you're actually looking at not just inspiration for plot, but at a really sophisticated and in-depth search tool and research tool.
It is, yes, this is a research tool when you already know a little bit of what you're looking for. But what you've just described is another way of using pictures. Again, that's the writing prompt. It's what's going on.
How clever of me to know that.
What's going on in this picture? Why are those people doing that? And yeah, that's another fun way to just get writing ideas.
Telling the story behind what you see.
Yes. And you might well find if you're doing specific research around a particular area because you need to know, say, what kind of town your bell foundry might be in, then you might see some strangers that just give you an idea. That's another thing that might happen. And again, that's the serendipity of using strangers' photographs.
When you say strangers, you mean people?
Well, photographs that were personal snapshots, but by people you don't know. So you can read anything you like into them.
Yeah.
If you knew the people, that would be a bit different. You wouldn't have that sense of remove. And if you're researching in the frame of mind to invent, then it actually helps that you don't know who took the pictures and who the people are in them. You can project whatever you want. Like using the solo picture as a writing prompt. I don't want to dismiss that actually, because that is something a lot of people do. If they just want to get some writing done, get the writing mechanism limbered up, perhaps for the day or perhaps after a break, then something like that can be very valuable.
Yes, I was just thinking we can go quite a long way back with photographs, back into the 1800s. So it's not just for books set in the present day. You can do it for quite a lot of historical works as well.
Yes.
And then presumably you can use paintings, portraits, landscapes, things like this to get an idea of what places were like maybe 300-400 years ago.
Yes, and it's interesting you mentioned paintings, because if you've read Deborah Mogek's Mogek, I never quite know how to pronounce it, Tulip Fever.
Tulip Fever, yes. Yeah.
And she explains how Vermeer's paintings were one of the big inspirations. And in fact, the edition I've got of that book has got colour plates inserted of various paintings that were her inspirations for particular scenes.
Oh, God, I'm doing really well today.
So some brilliant links there.
Yes,
but yes, so pictures, yes, they're worth 1,000 words. Apparently, that's how the saying goes. But they give you a lot, and they're also good for just bringing you back to an idea and letting you look at it again and think, oh, I thought there was something in that. Did I remember to explore that avenue?
If a picture paints 1,000 words, then presumably comics have more verbiage in them than any other books.
I'm not sure that I'm quite up to doing the maths on that. Comics are interesting though in terms of pictures, because the really well drawn comics I find have got such drama in each frame they sort of demand your attention by in every frame of the story, don't they? And then whatever's in the word balloons or a caption, if they have one, is extra to that. But most of it is done. Most of the storytellings in a good comic is done through the picture. Isn't
Actually,
it?
this is something we've lost over the years. All books used to be illustrated.
All of them. Well, I suppose that, yeah,
Dickens.
Dickens,
like
I was
this.
just thinking Dickens.
There were colour plates, things like not all books, but lots of books were, and we've lost that these days. Is that perhaps some extra inspiration we could add in for the reader?
Well, funnily enough, that's something I'm often asked by authors who are talking about self-publishing, and they often ask whether they should have illustrations commissioned for a novel. It's usually a novel, and there are a few considerations. One is that it rather interrupts the flow of the narrative to come across an illustration, because as we often say here, the words are what is creating the picture. So a picture may be worth 1,000 words, but a few good words it can create 1,000 different pictures, and my picture isn't the same as yours. And so a picture in the middle of a narrative, especially a novel, might well upset whatever is going on in the reader's mind if it doesn't look like what the reader imagined, because the artist has to create specifics that maybe even the writer wasn't dreaming of.
Yes, I can see that even info pics, maps and family trees, I sometimes find pull me up short and make me have to go back to them, and that can destroy the flow of a book.
I think a good family tree might be very useful in a family saga, or where things are getting quite complicated, but it should usually be in the end papers, because it's not going to interrupt anything. You always know where to find it.
Yes, yeah.
But there's another consideration about putting illustrations into a novel is that they cost more. So you're going to have to spend money getting them done properly. If you can do them yourself to the required standard, that's fine. And also probably you will draw what's in the author's mind clearly, although that still may not be the same as in the reader's mind. We were talking the other day, weren't we, about some of the characters in Lifeform 3. And we were having a net on Facebook, and everyone had a different version of what the bods looked like.
Absolutely.
And they're all right, and that's fine. But if someone tried to draw a bod, it would probably offend more people.
Yes, and one's personal picture derived from a book is very personal.
It is.
My wife will never ever go and see any of the Lord of the Rings films. It's one of her favourite books, and she doesn't want to change the mental image that she has of any of the scenes or characters. So she doesn't want to take on somebody else's vision of the Lord of the Rings. And
in fact, the less realistic a book, the more likely you are probably to annoy the fans of it when you try and make it visual, because the fantasy element is, it's what's in the texture of the reader's mind.
But we're getting a bit away from the focus of this.
That doesn't mean, though, that if you are writing a fantasy, you can't use photos to help you sort of get ideas. They can still help you, understand that the things you would have to have around you if you had a blacksmith forge, for instance, or just sort of get you in the mood for describing a lush green countryside.
Would it help with the blacksmith forge to have a picture of the blacksmith there?
Well, it might do, yeah.
So that you know what he's like.
Well, you might just know. It also might help you know just roughly what you would need if you were shoeing an animal. Now, you might change it to sort of putting steel claws on a dragon, but still, it would help you as a starting point.
Steel claws on a dragon. Is this a clue to your next book?
No.
Fine.
No dragons here.
No dragons.
But it's interesting you mentioned people, because this is the other big way in which I use resources like Flickr. I hold my own private casting sessions for my major characters.
You smiled when you said that, almost as if you were embarrassed.
No, I'm gleeful, because I was so pleased when I originally thought of it. what I do is, let me explain. If I've got a character who's, it helps me to be able to visualise some physical aspect of a character before I write them. Now, sometimes it will be that an actor I see in a film will suggest a physical type, and that's enough for me to think, okay, I kind of understand what it'd be like to be in their presence. Other times I've found, if I'm looking through a magazine, that a face will jump out at me and I'll think, either I know who they are in my book, or I can use them in some way, because there's immediately a sense of a person that comes out at me. And it can be the most nondescript face, actually, but it just does something. It puts on a light bulb in my brain. And I found that if I was struggling to visualise a character, what I could do was go onto Flickr and just look through. They have a section called Portraits, where people often put up portraits of their friends, or they've been experimenting with portrait photography. And again, they're quite happy for you to look at them. This isn't sort of invading anyone's privacy. But you can just look through people. And they're ordinary people. And I have cast several key characters from my novels by finding their faces on Flickr.
This is a fascinating insight. I mean, I'm used to authors describing a character's physical appearance so that I get some idea of the way the character looks and what they're like to deal with on an everyday basis. Here you're turning it round. You're taking a photograph or a picture to give you an idea of a character, the way they look, perhaps the way they sound, the way they move, whether they're an angry looking person or whatever, and putting that into the book.
Yes, I'm looking at them and making assumptions, actually.
Yeah.
But for a writer, it's very useful, because those assumptions bring someone to life for me.
Yes, and then I've got to take what you've written and turn it back again for a
then,
picture in
yes.
my mind. It'd be fascinating to see someday whether we all end up with the same sort of character that you started with.
I actually have a very old post on my blog where I put up the pictures of the three main characters from my Memories of a Future Life. And it would be interesting if you looked at them and said, oh, I didn't imagine so-and-so looked like that at all. But I did actually do a post where I put their pictures up.
Yes, that would be very interesting.
And that was with permission, by the way, from the original. There's
From the
another
people.
From the people. But another anecdote I have about using pictures of people is for one of my ghosted books, I needed to create the Prime Minister of Canada. And I looked up the Prime Minister of Canada and I thought, oh no, I need a sense of him as a person. And then I was kind of leafing through a magazine and I came across a picture of Alan Titchmarsh, who was wearing a suit. So he didn't look like Alan Titchmarsh normally does. And there was just something about the warmth of his expression in that one picture that gave me the character I was looking for my Prime Minister of Canada. So anyone who's listening in Canada, I know there are a few of you out there, hello Tina, for a very short period of time in one of my books, Alan Titchmarsh was the Prime Minister of Canada.
As opposed to Pierre Trudeau, yeah. Okay, right. I think I'd like to move on from pictures as inspiration, not because I want to leave the subject, but simply because I'm going to run out of time. Can we have a choice of music from you to round off this session?
We can, and it probably needs no explanation. Something about pictures, obviously, and I thought it'd be fun to have Gentlemen Take Polaroids by Japan.
And after that track from Japan, I think it makes sense to move on to looking at music. By the way, just in case you were wondering, I don't think we introduced ourselves at the top of the show, did we, Ros?
No, I think we just got straight into talking.
So there we are, as you just heard. The other side of the microphone is Ros.
I'm Ros Morris, and I'm a writer, editor, book doctor, that sort of thing.
And I'm Peter Snell. I'm a bookseller. And this is the second half of So you want to be a writer. Now we're looking at music as inspiration. Do you want to give me a general overview of that before we go into it in any depth?
Well, in much the same way as we've been talking about photographs helping to set up an atmosphere, that's one of the predominant ways in which you can use music as an inspirational aid to writing. But it can go much further than that. I mean, that's a very broad description of what music can do.
I thought you were just going to be talking about tracks you'll have on playing in the background whilst you're writing. Get you in the right
yes.
mood.
It can be that, or it can be tracks you use to think about what you're writing, about what you're going to write. And I often find I get great ideas when I'm driving along in the car, the radio's on, something comes on, and I think, that for some reason has just crystallised a particular moment that I need to have in my book, or it's made me think differently about it. All these little environmental contributions can catch you by surprise. And I've been running a blog for several years, a blog series called the Undercover Soundtrack, where I invite writers to give a playlist of music that has helped them write their book. And this isn't really music that is in the books, and the books aren't necessarily about music, the writers aren't necessarily musical, but what they all have in common is that during the process of creation, they have had pieces of music that have helped them create the final book. Now, it might be that these pieces were playing while they were writing. It might have been that it was a random thing heard on the radio, like I was just describing. It might be that it was something they played when they were going for a walk, or a piece of music that maybe conjured up a time for them that was quite nostalgic and that helped them write a piece of the book. All sorts of things, but these are sort of deeply personal, deeply creative essays that take you into the mind of a writer. And what's more, another thing I really love about it is we can all share it, because what I do is I get people to give YouTube links to the pieces of music, so you can just click on it and you can listen to it with fresh ears if you already know the piece, or listen to it anew and get the explanation of what the writer was feeling, or what it gave that writer. But so music can be, it's a very complex thing, isn't it? It's so mood changing. It's a time capsule. It can freeze time.
Music can do such extraordinary things. I mean, you could just use something presumably to get you going first thing in the morning when you start writing, just to set you in the mood, and that might vary depending on whether you were writing a soft, gentle romance or a hard-hitting hack and slay novel from some Roman history period or something like that.
Yes, and people are so individual in what they need to get them going in the morning. Sometimes people like the ritual of the same piece that makes them feel inspired. Sometimes they think, okay, I know that I'm going to be writing, say, a swashbuckling fight scene, so I'm going to get something. Film soundtracks are great for that. And some people also find that they're very distracted if they can hear words, if they can hear lyrics. So film soundtracks are very good,
right,
all classical without lyrics. Other people take no notice of the lyrics at all. It's all part of the music, and that's what I think, actually, because often I can't hear what people are singing anyway. But
right, that's not just an age thing. I think it happens to all of us.
Unless the diction, having done singing, I actually know that unless you are very good at diction, and hear how precisely I tried to say that as well, being very self-conscious all of a sudden. But unless you're very good at diction, then it's very hard to make lyrics entirely clear and intelligible. So that's why I often find I can hear kind of what I want to, and having a piece of inspirational music with lyrics on doesn't bother me one jot. But other people find it's too much. They can feel words getting in the way, and they don't want that. And that, I think, shows how using a prompt like music is more than words. It's emotions.
Yes, I can see that if you were writing a a First World War novel, then First World War trench songs might help establish the mood and understand what's going on. But talking about the mood, I mean, we were talking about pictures earlier, and the sort of things you can put on a mood board or to have around you to make you think of a particular environment or particular people. You can use the music in the same way to establish a mood. Would you play happy music when you've got a happy scene that you're writing?
I might do. Well, what I probably, for particular scenes, I might rifle through my music collection and find a whole CD that will probably help me with a particular section that I'm writing. Because I don't really want to be disturbed by having to put different CDs in the machine all the time. I just want to get into the flow, so I'll pick an album that's probably got pretty much a uniform flavour that will probably get me immersed. But gradually I find that as a book goes on, the particular tracks that become very significant, and this gradually builds up into what I call the undercover soundtrack for that book. And it's undercover because nobody would know it was there. It won't ever be described in the book. The characters won't listen to it. It's private, it's for me.
Yeah. So it's private, it's for you, and yet you're asking other authors to bare their souls and tell people the music they've been listening to. Is that a fairly difficult thing to do, to release some of the process of writing a book to other people?
I think some people do find it difficult, but I think they also enjoy being in an environment where they can share this with people who are genuinely interested. And that's what I like so much about the series. When I get a new post for it in my inbox, I know it's a writer who is communicating something with me about the deep process they've been through to make the book. I find it very interesting. I have readers for the series who find it very interesting, and they just come back each week to see how the latest author has played the game. And often authors, when they've done this, remark to me that they really enjoyed it as a process. Partly they enjoyed revisiting the book and the journey that it took them on, because you do become very attached to a book when you write it. It's like if you've been in a play and the many months you spend building up to it and rehearsing and becoming the characters and getting everything right, it becomes a big journey and an experience, and writing a book is like that. So often these writers say they have relished the chance to revisit it and to examine from a slightly different angle what they were doing. And you might think that might kind of discharge the appeal of the book for a reader, but it doesn't, because you can write about creating a book and that doesn't take away from the book at all.
No, I can see that. In the earlier part of this show, we were talking about pictures and the way you could develop a story from a picture. Now, a lot of music, particularly ballads and songs, have a story built into them. A lot of orchestral works have a story, the progress of a stream or the movement of a storm across the countryside or something like that. Can you use that in the same way to build a story around a piece of music, or gain inspiration from a piece of music for a story?
I have a terrific example of a writer who did that in a rather interesting way. She had two storylines. Her name is Linda Gillard, and I think the novel she was writing about was Untying the Knot,
right,
which was about a husband and wife. The husband had been in the army and he was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. I think I've got this right because I'm remembering it from quite a while ago. And then there was the wife who just didn't seem to be in the same mental space as him because of the experiences he'd had. And she was trying to weave their stories together, and she said she couldn't make it work. And she was she was struggling to find a way to make them really work together as one narrative. And then she heard a piece by Philip Glass, and she suddenly thought, this is what I've been looking for, this way of combining two voices, which was happening in the Philip Glass piece, just gave her the mental leap to make the book work. And that is inspiration that's come from the structure of a piece of music.
Oh, that's rather splendid, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
I love that story.
I'm glad I asked that question, because I'd like to point out to everybody that we don't rehearse this at all, so
You'd
I
never
had
know.
no idea that was coming out. Isn't this seamless?
This is seamless. But yeah, I love that example. And there've been many other examples where people have written about how the structure of a piece of music, because music is very structured. And in fact, I think in classical music, don't they talk about having a theme and a development and then variations, and then it all comes together at the end, and
Absolutely.
it's almost like a story.
Yes,
It is like a story.
Absolutely.
And so it can tune your
it's
mind.
plotted in the same way that the novel could be. Yes.
Could be, yes. So it can tune your mind to patterns. Another way that I've known people use music is as we talked about mood for particular scenes, but some people have used pieces of music to just get them to think, a bit more sharply about an action scene. In fact, I used Fatboy Slim to write a chase scene in one of my books.
Right.
And it was an entire album of Fatboy Slim, and I did have to have it on repeat. But the cheeky rhythms and the sort of unexpected turns and the slight quirks just kept my mind pinging in the right way and thinking of the right sort of things. And I wrote the first draft of an action scene to Fatboy Slim. When I read it back, it was a lot better than action scenes I had written without music.
Now that is fascinating. So, do you think then, if as it appears a lot of authors do listen to music, either deliberately or simply because they enjoy listening to music while they're writing, that in fact books nowadays may be different from books that were written 50, 60, 70 years ago, partly because the inspirational music that's behind them is so different. We don't have old 20s and 30s jazz bands playing so much these days. Could there be a difference? Music now is faster and tauter and more amplified. Would this affect the way we have more dystopian novels these days and more action novels?
I think it would be hard to know if the trends we're seeing in prose fiction could be attributed just to music, because equally a lot of people learn storytelling techniques from films.
Now hang on, this is my thesis and I'm going to build on
it. All right, build more, but I doubt it.
No, I doubt it as well. I was just sort of thinking off round the edges, but
music can do surprising things for you. You can discover surprising things about your writing if you write with music. If you don't want to try it, if you're afraid you might ruin your novel by writing a bit of it with music going in the background or after listening to a piece of music, then just write a letter to a friend with your headphones on, playing Fatboy Slim or something. See what happens. And writing's experimenting anyway. I discovered by accident that this worked for me, because I used to think that I couldn't bear to be able to hear anything because I'm really sensitive to music. But then I suddenly discovered my sensitivity to it was something I could use. And a lot of writers who contribute to the Undercover Soundtrack have found that too.
Well, then I think there may be something in my suggestion, because you're looking at the zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, and that's coming in from all the influences, other things people are reading, current television, radio, pictures, also, and music, all sorts of things are building the way the authors think and the way they write. So it's all these external influences.
Well, certainly our world is helping us make our
Yeah.
books. You certainly can't argue with that.
Right, back to music.
Back to
There we are.
music.
So, how else would you use it? Do you use it in any sort of cathartic way when you've finished a book? Do you find it helps to play music to calm you down, to get you out of the book, to get you back into the real world, to get you back onto your next project?
Oh, that's a really good question, because I find it very difficult to leave books behind. And I write reams afterwards about what happened to the characters. I never show it to anybody, and it's not intended to be shown to anybody, but it's a reflection of the fact that when you're so deeply immersed, it is difficult to extricate yourself from the book. And I often find I'm taking my Undercover Soundtrack around with me and my headphones, going for runs to it, because I don't want to leave the book behind. I don't know that I'd have music for emerging from it unless I was already preparing another book and starting to look for music that would suit it. And so yes, I might, if I was working up another book and I'd found music that seemed to go with it, that I might start playing that. But I'd always have this pull back towards the book I was finishing, because I just end up feeling so involved in them.
So if you hear a track that you used on a book 3-4 years ago, does that bring it all back into focus again?
Yes, it does. It's a complete time machine. But that's one of the wonderful things
that's
about music,
great,
isn't
it? Yes.
This is how wonderful the music is, and the human brain, and it's just sound, and it makes this transportation, the transformation. It's magic.
I think there's only one way we can cap that last comment you've made, and that's to find a really good piece of music to go out on. Now, just in case you'd forgotten, I'm Peter Snell and this is Ros Morris. You can contact us if you've got any questions or you want us to cover a particular topic in future shows. Just contact us via Surrey Hills Community Radio. You'll find them on Google, Facebook and Twitter. You can find Ros very easily just by Googling
Ros Morris.
Ros Morris Writer, or indeed you can look for her blog, The Undercover Soundtrack.
Or my other blog, which is Nail Your Novel.
And
there's a nice bit of music out
yes,
there.
Yes. A passing silver band or something.
Quick, I've had an idea.
Right, so let's go on to the last track. And we're going to finish with...
Well, what I wanted to do is play a piece that meant a lot to me when I was writing Lifeform 3, and Lifeform 3 features horses, and one of the pieces of music that I used was Vangelis's Pulsar, which when I was a kid it was the theme tune for one of my favourite shows, which was Horses Galore.
Right.
And not only that, I do love Vangelis anyway. I love electronic music. I think it's got such soul to it if it's done well. And Pulsar has the excitement of galloping feet, and just whipping manes, and the joy of speed and a powerful animal. And that was one of the things I wanted to remind myself of when I was writing Lifeform 3, because it does feature horses. So Vangelis, Pulsar.
I have to come in very quickly. I'm sitting opposite Ros, and when she's talking about horses and hoofbeats and whipping manes, her face lights up and her smile gets 3 times wider than normal. So